Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or whatever daytime you're having at the moment. How's everyone doing today? I hope you're all doing great and ready to level up your English today. Welcome to Takeaway English class. Here's your teacher, Mary. Let's give a minute for more people to join and then we can start our today's lesson. It's all about relative clauses, right? Okay, so let's get started. I'm sure more people will join us as we go. Okay. So again, we are learning relative clauses. If you attended my previous classes on the grammar behind phrasal verbs, where is it? You already know that I like to go deeper when it comes to grammar, right? I don't just make my students memorize complicated grammar terms. I like to use visual ideas and explain things step by step, so you can understand the logic behind grammar. That's why I've written this book that explains everything about relative clauses in a simple way. It starts from the basics, like what a noun is, a relative pronoun is, or relative adverb is, because we need nouns, relative pronouns, relative adverbs to build relative clauses. And it takes you step by step from beginner to intermediate level. And of course, don't worry, it's not one of those books full of dry grammar rules. It's written in a fun, easy to follow way with plenty of examples, exercises, and explanations that actually make sense. I designed it for people, for students who want to speak and not just memorize, for students who always ask how and why, like me. So if you are that kind of learner, you'll discover the logic behind relative clauses and then move on to what really matters, practice. Okay? During my previous live lessons, we talked about relative clauses as an idea and about their importance. We also learned some of the relative words, pronouns and adverbs, right? That we use to build relative clauses. We talked about nouns as well, different categories of nouns and their roles in a sentence. These small details help us build relative clauses correctly. If you are a first-time listener, if you didn't join my previous live lessons, you can always find me on YouTube, where I'm gonna upload my previous live lessons, where I talked about nouns, pronouns, and so on. Now, today I want to draw your attention to the two different types of relative clauses. Two different types of relative clauses. Guys, thank you very much for the likes, follows, shares. I really appreciate it. That means a lot. Okay. So, again, today I want to explain the two different types of relative clauses. Because yes, we know what a relative clause is, but it's important to understand the different types of relative clauses and the differences between them. So there are two types of relative clauses. Defining. Hi Yuna, welcome. So again, there are two different types of relative clauses. Defining a relative clause and a non-defining relative clause. You're very welcome. Okay. So think of these two types of relative clauses like this. Imagine you are at the airport. Which of the following documents are essential? A passport, or a driving license, or maybe bachelor's degree, or resume, or a birth certificate. Which one of these documents are essential? The passport is essential, right? So it's like a defining relative clause. It identifies the person. We cannot be identified without the passport, right? Oh, thank you, Nadia. So thank you very much. Okay, so without a passport, we cannot be identified. So it's like a defining relative clause. It identifies the person. That's exactly what a defining relative clause does. So the type of relative clause that works like a passport is a defining relative clause. Why? Because a defining relative clause gives essential information. Without this information, we cannot identify a person, thing, animal, place, time, the reason, etc. Ramis, you can go to my TikTok profile and you can find there all about my lessons, my profiles, etc. Okay? If you can't find it or if you don't understand something, you can always send me a message on TikTok, okay? So again, the type of relative clauses that works like a passport is a defining relative clause. Because a defining relative clause gives essential information. Without this information, we cannot identify a person, a thing, animal, idea, reason, place, time, okay? So, right, exactly right. Even my fridge has a passport. My cat has a passport. So, exactly the same goes with the defining relative clause. We attach defining relative clause to the person, thing, animal, something, or someone to provide essential information, to make a listener understand which person or thing we are talking about. Okay, examples. You are watching football, okay? You are watching football. You are watching football from outside. From outside. Okay? With your friend. Okay? You are watching football. And you say, the boy is my friend. The boy is my friend. Can your friend understand which boy you are talking about? can your friend understand the boy is my friend? Now tell me, can your friend, this one, your friend, understand which boy you are talking about? There are lots of boys playing football. There are lots of people. And you tell your friend, the boy is my friend. Your friend cannot understand which of the boys is your friend. Right? That's where we need defining relative clause, a passport, right? A passport to provide essential information about the boy, to make the listener understand, to make your friend understand which boy you are talking about. That's where we need essential information. That's what defining relative clause does. It works like a passport. It helps us provide essential information to make the listener understand which boy we are talking about. Okay? That's how defining relative clause works. However, there are some rules we should know when using defining relative clauses. Good morning, Xiao. Good morning, lovely. Okay? Now, I built a relative clause, a defining relative clause that is essential, and the friend will understand which boy I'm talking about right away. Okay? So, I'm gonna put defining relative clause between the boy and my friend here. Okay? And instead of saying the boy is my friend, I'm going to say the boy who is standing next to the goalkeeper is my friend. So between the boy and is my friend, I built a defining relative clause. I provided essential information. Hi there, good morning. No, I'm not. Okay, so the boy who is standing next to the goalkeeper No worry, Xiao, we've just started. Anyway, I'm going to upload this live lesson on my YouTube, so you can just rewatch it then. So, who is standing next to the goalkeeper is my friend. Now, can you understand which boy I'm talking about? The boy who is standing next to the goalkeeper is my friend. Good morning, Mr. Welcome. Now, can you understand which boy I'm talking about? The boy who is standing next to the goalkeeper is my friend. Now we know, right? This one. Here we have a goalkeeper, right? A goalkeeper. And this one is my friend, or his or her friend. So, the boy who is standing next to the goalkeeper is my friend. This information is essential. It works like a passport, It helps us identify a person, a thing, an animal. This one, you can find it on, I'm sorry, I can't say that word because, you know, TikTok is very sensitive to those words. Okay, so who is standing next to the goalkeeper? This is essential information, works like a passport, and it helps us identify a person, thing, animal, idea, place, time, right? But of course, we cannot always use who. If you attended my yesterday's live lesson, you already know that there are different relative words that we use depending on we are talking about animals, ideas, places, etc. Here we have a person, therefore we use relative word who. And note that here who doesn't work as a question word. We are not asking something. Here who works as a relative pronoun. Like it works like he, she, it, okay? And of course, since it works like he, she, it, we cannot say the boy who he is standing next to the goalkeeper. When you say who, it already means he. Okay? So again, defining relative clause provides essential information. Without this information, we cannot identify a person or a thing. Okay? And again, of course, you can say the boy is my friend, He is standing next to the goalkeeper. And of course, it's perfectly correct. But now you can notice I've used two separate sentences, right? The boy is my friend. He is standing next to the goalkeeper. There's nothing wrong with these sentences. They are perfectly correct. However, I've used short, separate sentences. That's how we start learning English at school. That's how we start learning a new language. We use short, separate sentences, right? However, relative clauses help us make our sentences longer. They help us sound more natural and fluent, right? That's our goal, to sound more natural, fluent, right? Make longer sentences instead of short, separate sentences. So instead of saying the boy is my friend, he's standing next to the goalkeeper, we can combine these two sentences and turn them into one longer sentence. So the boy is my friend. He is standing next to the goalkeeper. We say the boy, relative clause, who is standing next to the goalkeeper is my friend. Okay? So every time you are not sure whether to use a relative clause or not, ask yourself, if I remove this information, can the listener understand which person or thing I am talking about? The boy is my friend, especially if you are watching from outside, right? And there are lots of people playing. The boy is my friend doesn't provide essential information to identify which boy we are talking about. That's where we need a passport. Okay? Again, this was defining relative clause, essential information, a passport. Okay? Now let's talk about non-defining relative clauses. Now think of them like this, like a driving license or a bachelor's degree. These are extra information, right? Yes, we may need these documents, but they are additional, extra information, right? We use them after we have already identified the person or thing. Can we use these documents if we are not identified? If you just go to the airport and give these documents, then you cannot be identified, right? Firstly, we need a passport. So first we need a passport, and then it's optional, right? We can provide resume, driving license, etc. This is a non-defining relative clause. Additional information. This information is usually optional, right? Extra information. Now, again, you are watching football again. Now we are talking about non-defining relative clauses. Do you teach people privately? Yes, I do. You can find all of the information about me, about my classes, my books in my profile, okay? Or just send me a message on TikTok. Non-defining. Non-defining. It already tells you that this information is not essential, right? Non-defining, like a resume or driving license or bachelor's degree. They are optional, extra information about you, but not essential, right? Again, you are watching football, and from outside, and now you tell your friend, my friend is very good at football. Here, I started the sentence with my friend. My friend, note that. So, most likely, I started the sentence with my friend because the listener, my friend, already knows who I'm talking about. The friend is already identified. Okay? When we start the sentence with my friends, we already know that the listener can understand which boy we are talking about. So usually we start non-defining relative clauses with my friend or just use their names because we already know that the listener already knows who we are talking about. Okay? My friend is very good at football. Maybe we already talked about my friend. Or maybe you already used passport. You already told them that the boy who's standing next to the goalkeeper is my friend. Of course, then you can continue talking and say, my friend is very good at football. So the listener already knows about your friend, okay? Now, what is a non-defining relative clause? As I've mentioned before, it provides extra information. Okay? It's optional. It's up to you. Okay? And of course, it goes between. So we can say, my friend who is for example, good at football, who is good, we need commas here, who is good at football is 15 years old. Okay? This is a non-defining relative clause. I provided extra information. This is an extra information. It's not essential information. Even without this information, this person already knows who am I talking about. Okay? This is extra information. Now, can you notice the difference between them? Between defining and non-defining relative clauses. The boy who is standing next to the goalkeeper is my friend. Defining, non-defining, and non-defining. Can you notice the difference between these two sentences? I've used commas in the non-defining. Non-defining. I've used commas. Why? Because here I'm not identifying the person. I just add extra information about my friend. We don't need a passport here. We already know which person or thing the person is talking about. We just add extra information, maybe just to show off and say, my friend who is good at football, my friend who speaks 6 languages. These are extra information. They are optional. Okay? So when we just show off or we just add extra information, we need commas. Even when speaking, we pause for a second. My friend, pause for a second, who is good at football, pause, is 15 years old. So we don't just put these commas randomly. They are essential. So we can add extra information. And it's, of course, optional. Even without this information, the person already knows who or what we are talking about. So again, with non-defining relative clauses, we need commas. And even when speaking, we pause for a second, okay? Because this information is extra information. The commas help us understand that the information is extra. It's not essential. However, guys, be careful with commas, okay? Why? If I tell you, my boyfriend who lives in Spain knows 5 languages. 5 languages. As we already know, in defining a relative clause, we don't use commas because defining relative clause helps us identify which one, right? So here, if I don't use commas, it means I have more than one boyfriend. Maybe I have 5 of them. So I have maybe 5 boyfriends. One of them lives in Spain, one of them in America, one of them in Italy, one of them in Russian. So I want to identify, to make the listener understand which boyfriend I am talking about, the one who lives in Spain. So be careful with commas, because if we don't use commas, it means we use defining relative clause. And we use a defining relative clause to identify which one, who lives in Spain. So now the listener understands that the one boyfriend that lives in Spain knows 5 languages. So the listener thinks that you have 5 boyfriends, but the one who lives in Spain knows 5 languages. So be careful with commas, of course, in writing. So this sentence we should write with non-defining relative clause and say, my boyfriend, and add commas. If we add commas, it means we are not identifying boyfriend. We just want to show off maybe, or just provide extra information about our boyfriend, but it's optional. Okay, my boyfriend who lives in Spain, comma, speaks or knows 5 languages. Okay. So think of it like this. If I remove this relative clause, can the listener understand who I am talking about? If yes, this is a non-defining. The information here is optional. Even without this sentence, the listener understands who are you talking about, okay? My boyfriend knows 5 languages, okay? Whereas here you are identifying which of your boyfriends knows 5 languages. Okay, because defining relative clause is an identifier, like a passport. It identifies who or what we are talking about. Okay. Okay. Russian. Guys, if you understood everything I've explained so far, could you please combine these 2 sentences into one longer sentence using defining relative clause, defining like a passport. And I'll be back in 2 minutes, okay? Be back. Okay. Let's see if you understood everything I've explained so far. And I'll be back and we are going to talk about relative pronouns. Okay? Anyone, guys? Can someone tell me, combine these two sentences into one longer sentence using defining relative clause? Anyone? The teacher is kind. She speaks Russian. Can someone use relative clause, defining relative clause, and combine these two sentences into one longer sentence? Excellent, Magda. Very well done. So the teacher who is kind speaks Russian. So here, the teacher who is kind speaks Russian. Maybe there are lots of teachers, but the one who is kind speaks Russian, okay? Here, who is kind helps us understand which one. It tells us that there are lots of teachers, but the one that is kind speaks Russian. There are lots of teachers, okay, Muhammad, the teacher, and then we need relative word who, right? The teacher who is kind speaks Russian. We don't need she anymore here, okay? The teacher who is kind, who, we need a relative word, right? Who is kind speaks Russian. We don't need she anymore here because who already means she. Okay? Of course, we can say the teacher is kind. She speaks Russian. They are perfectly correct. But we use the teacher is kind, one sentence. She speaks Russian, two sentences. Instead of using two short, separate sentences, relative clauses help us combine two sentences into one with the helping word who. That means she. Here, we are not using who as a question word. We are not asking. Here, who means she. It tells us that we are talking about person, about the teacher. So the teacher who is kind speaks Russian. Okay? Excellent, Mohammed. Exactly. The teacher who is kind speaks Russian, right? Instead of saying the teacher is kind, or she speaks Russian. We can say just the teacher who is kind speaks Russian. This means there are lots of teachers, but the one who is kind speaks Russian. Okay? Now, my friend who lives in London is coming to visit me. What does this sentence mean? Here, am I identifying the friend, or am I just providing extra information about my friend? What do you think? Is this information extra, or do I need this information to identify my friend? Is this information essential, or it's just extra information about my friend? What do you think? Anyone? My friend who lives in London is coming to visit me. Okay, but is this information essential to identify my friend, or it just extra information that my friend lives in London? Okay. When we have commas, well done, Xiao Xiao, exactly, this is extra information. When we have commas in the sentence, it shows us that this information is not essential. Even if I remove this information, it still makes sense. That is, the friend is already identified. I'm just telling you that he or she lives in London. Even without this information, the sentence makes sense, is complete. My friend is coming to visit me. Of course, if you need extra information or It's optional, right? Of course, you can say who lives in London, but it's not essential. Okay. Guys, if you are a first-time listener, it will be confusing because during my previous live lessons, we've talked about that who, which, whose, these words, when we use them in the relative clauses, they don't work like question words. We are not asking. They are relative pronouns. Who means he or she or they. Okay? Which means it. Whose means his, her, their, our. Okay? With relative clauses, these words are not question words. They work differently. Okay? They replace words such as he, she, they, you, and so on. We use who for people, which for things and animals, whose for possession, and so on, right? So, my friend who lives in London is coming to visit me. It's not a question. Here, who works like he. My friend, he lives in London, is coming to visit me. So again, relative clauses help us avoid repetition, saying he many times in a sentence. They help us combine short sentences to make longer sentences, right? So my friend who lives in London is coming to visit me. It's not a question. It's a normal sentence, okay? And of course, if you're just joining, you can go on my YouTube channel and watch my previous live lessons, especially yesterday's live lesson. I'm going to upload yesterday's live lesson on my YouTube channel, so you can watch them to have an idea what is a relative clause, what a noun is, a pronoun, and so on, okay? So, for example, here, defining relative clause when we provide essential information. The phone is a new model. The phone is a new model. Can you guess which phone I mean. Let's define it. You can find the book in my profile, in my TikTok profile. Okay? So the phone is a new model. Can you guess which phone I mean? No, right? We don't have essential information. There are lots of phones. But we don't have essential information like a passport to understand which phone is a new model, right? Now let's add defining relative clause, essential information, and say the phone that costs 1,500 is a new model. Essential information, a passport is here, right? Now we know which phone is a new model, the one that costs 1,500, right? So it gives essential information that the listener must have. Without defining relative clause, the listener might not know who or what we mean, which phone we mean, right? And let's have a look at non-defining clause. Where is it? Here. The iPhone 15 is a new model. Now we have non-defining relative clause. Why? Because we start the sentence with the iPhone 15. Do we need essential information to understand which one? The iPhone 15 is a new model. Do we need essential information here to understand which one? No, right? Here it's optional. Exactly, Shausha. Thank you. Let's define it. It's all about relative clauses. You can find the book in my TikTok profile. If you can't find it, just send me a message on TikTok. Okay? The phone is a new model. The iPhone 15 is a new model. Here, we already know which one. And now it's optional. You can use non-defining relative clause. Will you apply it? So I'm going to upload all the live lessons that you need to watch, meaning what is a relative clause, what is a noun, and so on, that I've explained during my previous live lessons. Of course, I'm going to upload everything on my YouTube channel. So again, here we don't need essential information to understand which phone is a new model. It's optional. Of course, we can say, Xiao, I'm not sure about today, but I'm going to upload today's live lesson and yesterday's live lessons, well, tomorrow, okay? Here, it's optional. Of course, I can say the iPhone 15, which is orange, is a new model. Of course, we can add extra information, but it's optional. Even without this extra information that this is orange, which is orange, we already know which phone is a new model. That is a non-defining relative clause, okay? Non-defining relative clause. Okay, now we have an idea of the difference between defining and non-defining relative clauses. Now let's go deeper and learn the relative words that are used in defining relative clauses. Okay? Defining, not non-defining. Yeah, yesterday we talked about relative words, but today we're going to go deeper and learn each of the relative words used in defining relative clauses, because there are some detailed rules and structures that we use only with defining relative clauses. They have different rules and structures. That's why it's better to first learn everything about defining relative clause and then move on to non-defining, okay? Because we already know that we should be very careful with commas, right? Because commas can change the story, the idea, right, of the sentence. The same goes with the other rules when it comes to the defining relative clauses. So, for example, if you use relative word that, we've talked about the relative word, sorry, that, right? If you use in a non-defining relative clause, it becomes defining, okay? That's why it's important to know all the rules when it comes to the defining relative clause, and then we can move to the non-defining relative clause, okay? relative words or relative pronouns. And of course, you can call them relative words, relative pronouns, words. Okay? Who or that. We can use these two words only in a defining relative clause when a sentence provides essential information. Okay. Tomorrow, unfortunately, not. I'll be back on Friday. Tomorrow we have Thursday. No, not tomorrow. I'll be back on Friday. You're very welcome. Who and that only with defining relative clause. Again, what is a defining relative clause? That helps us identify a person or thing, right? We can use relative words who and that for people. For example, he's the man who fixed my phone. Now, as you can see, without relative clause, he's the man. Does this sentence make sense? He's the man. No, right? We need essential information. He's the man who fixed my phone. The students who study every day succeed. The students. Yeah, sure. The students. Doesn't make sense, right? We need essential information about the students. The students who study every day succeed. Exactly. Thank you, Jean-Charles. So, this is a defining relative clause. We need essential information to identify the man and the students. In spoken English, in defining relative clauses, we often use that instead of who. We already talked about it, right? So, in spoken English, nowadays, we usually use that instead of who. Who is more formal? Well, not as formal as whom, but that is more casual and commonly used in everyday situations. That he's the man that fixed my phone, or the students that study every day succeed. Okay? Whom. We use whom for people when they are the object of the verb. Yesterday we talked about what an object is, right? We already know its function in a sentence, right? So we use whom for people when they are the object of the verb. For example, I lent money to John. John here is the object of the sentence, right? Because here John receives the action. He was given the money. So John is the object of the sentence. We can use whom. The man whom I lent money to doesn't want to give it back. Or the students whom she invited came early. Now I'm gonna provide 3 sentences, no, 4. I want you to tell me which of the sentence is incorrect, okay? If you attended my yesterday's live lesson, you will notice the mistake right away, okay? One, 2, 3, 4. The man okay. Can someone tell me there is one sentence that isn't correct? Which one? Very well done. Excellent. number 3. Can you tell us why it's incorrect? Hi there. Welcome. Welcome to Takeaway English class. Oh, thank you for the gifts. Very well done, Mohammed. Excellent. So when talking about people, we can use very well done, Shao. Excellent. I'm so happy that you understood yesterday's live lesson about whom, who, and that, right? Because of course we can use whom, who, and that. It's up to you. If you like to use whom, you can do that. Whom, who, and that. But we already know that there are some structures that we should follow, right? When we use whom, we can use prepositions either in front of the relative word whom or at the end. Or we can use who. In this case, we put the preposition at the end, or we can use that and put the preposition at the end, right? However, we already know if we say to in front of whom, it's very formal, right? Very formal. If we use whom and then to, it's just formal. It's just formal, very formal. If we use who, we should put the preposition to at the end. The same goes with that at the end. First comes who, first comes that, and then we have the preposition. Who and that are commonly used nowadays, right? Whom is more formal, used in formal writings or emails, right? Whereas who and that are used in everyday situations, in casual situations, in spoken English, right? However, we will get back to these relative words and do some exercises tomorrow, okay? Now, let's talk about which. We already know that we can use which for animals and things. The phone which I bought yesterday is broken, or the phone that I bought yesterday is broken. In American English, they usually use that in the defining relative clause when talking about things or animals. They don't use which. However, in British English or in English general, we use which as well as that. They are both correct. Okay? The dog that barked all night kept me awake, or the dog which barked all night kept me awake. They are all perfectly correct. It's up to you whether you use which or that. It's optional. However, again, that is commonly used in spoken English, in casual situations, which is more formal, okay? We use which in formal writings or emails. Or you can use that in formal writings and emails. They are both correct, okay? And note that, guys, again, with relative clauses, so, both are correct, okay? American, they usually prefer using that, okay? When it comes to animals and things, okay? With people, they use both who and that. However, we all know that English is English. I would say American is just the accent and not the language, right? Because when we learn grammar, we learn English grammar, not American, right? So which and that, they are both correct when talking about things and animals. Okay? And again, important note that we can never use what with relative clauses. The relative words we use with relative clauses are the words we are learning during my live lessons, okay? Without what? It's another story, it's another grammar topic when we can use what instead of nouns, right? But with the relative clauses, we never use what. Okay? So now you remember that I like to call the relative word that the king of the relative words. Why? Because we can replace almost all the relative words with that. We can replace who, whom, which, where, when, why. We can replace them with the relative word that. That's why I call it the king of the relative words. But we can use that only in defining relative clauses. We can never use the relative word that with non-defining relative clauses, okay? Never. Only with defining relative clauses. when we provide essential information, okay? And of course, there are always some exceptions. And that exception is whose? This one. When we are talking about possession, that something belongs to someone, like his car, her jacket, her dog, your pen, your car, we should always use whose in defining relative clause. So we use relative word whose for a person, sorry, animal or thing that owns something, or about something that belongs to someone. I met a student whose ideas are interesting. His ideas are interesting, right? So we replace his with whose, right? I met a student whose ideas are interesting. The ideas belong to the student. So every time you use that, you say that something belongs to someone, like his car, his phone, etc., we should replace it with a whose. The house whose roof is broken needs repair. The roof belongs to the house. The horse whose leg is injured is resting. The leg belongs to the horse. Okay? Common mistakes are when we use that instead of whose. We cannot say, I met a student that ideas are interesting, or the house that roof is broken, or the horse that leg is injured. Okay? When we need whose, when we talk about possession, we use whose, not that, not what, only whose. Okay? So basically, whose is the only one relative word that cannot be replaced by that. Okay? Never. Okay, guys. I'm gonna head off and leave you all here. On Friday, we are going to move on and learn relative adverbs because they need different structures, okay? And of course, then we are going to do some exercises so I know you understood everything I've explained so far, right? I'm going to upload my previous live lessons tomorrow on my YouTube channel, so you can go and watch or rewatch them again. All the information you want to know about me, about my books, about my courses, about my live lesson schedule, you can find all the information in my TikTok profile. Or if you have additional questions, you can always send me a message on TikTok. Okay? I'll see you Friday 10 a.m. in the morning. And don't forget to check my stories where I always tell you about my upcoming live lessons, where you can just click the register button so it will register you automatically. Okay? Thank you for being here with me. Have a nice rest of the day. You are very welcome, Xiao Xiao. Have an amazing rest of the day, and I'll see you on Friday at 10 a.m. Okay? Bye, Muhammad. Have a nice day. Take care, guys. See you.